Let's do this then. Hi, welcome. I hope everyone is fine in these weird times. Tonight, I'll be speaking about how to use REST APIs in PowerShell. Let me, okay, go to the present mode. A little bit about me. My name is Graziella Iezzi, and I'm a business application engineer, which means I take care of most of all the corporate third-party web applications our employees use on a daily basis. Things like Jira, Confluence, Slack, Workplace by Facebook, and many others. They can be on-premise or SaaS application, and this is how I came to know PowerShell around 4 years ago. As I needed to interact with them and automate daily tasks, or just to be able to get data out of them quickly in a format I liked, without having to go click many buttons in the interface. And since then, I've been fascinated about PowerShell and all you can do with it. I am Italian. I live in Amsterdam. I've been living here for the last 4 years, and this is the meme that best represents me. Maybe many of you can relate with that. What to expect tonight is an overview of what REST APIs are, what you need to know before you get hands-on with them. I guess many of us start just playing around and then maybe read some documentation. Invoke-RestMethod, which is the main commandlets you will use to work with APIs in PowerShell, and how authentication and pagination work, how you can get data or send data through APIs to application, to ask them to do what you need them to do for you. And those will be covered with examples from Slack and GitHub. And then at the end, some takeaways to recap what we talked about. Before everything, I think we can clear what actually an API is. The acronym stands for Application Programming Interface, and if you look up the definition online, you can find so many results. Everyone has created their own. This is from the Oxford University Press, and it says that it is a set of programming tools that enables a program to communicate with another program or an operating system, and that helps software developers create their own applications. Now, it looks all too nice, maybe sometimes can be complicated, but as everyone else, to make things easier, what I like to say normally to explain to people that are not very familiar is that they are a set of endpoints that allows you to interact with a specific web application, where endpoints are just a set of dedicated URLs, so web-based and accessible through HTTP or HTTPS, that when they are used, run a set of functions server-side to return the response in a standard way, which mostly it is through JSON. This graph may be useful for you to understand visually what is the architecture. When you send a request, it reaches that interface that allows you to interact with a web server somewhere without you worrying about where the actual implementation of the application is, nor where the data are stored, or not even how they are stored, how they are developed, what technology they use. You just interact with the APIs, which are the interface on top of everything. And it will take care of collecting the results for you without you worrying about anything. So what does REST mean? REST stands for Representational State Transfer, and it is the architectural style that defines the guidelines about how the APIs have been developed. Those guidelines have been defined by Roy Fielding in his PhD dissertation in 2000. And they identify how you are expecting the API to be developed, what standard they follow, and what they are used for. So if you have worked with the same type in the past, you can expect a similar implementation. Some of the properties that he defined are performance and scalability that allow the retrieval of large amount of data in an easy way, simplicity, having a unified interface to use that as a similar structure, basically. Reliability makes it easy to recover from partial failures, but there are also portability, visibility, and some others. Some of the constraints that implement those properties are, for example, a uniform interface, which simplify the architecture, enabling independence for each different endpoint, so they can evolve separately. They don't depend from each other. They would have the same format across different endpoints. You are expecting the data to be retrieved, to get the data in the same way, calling different endpoints. Client-server architecture, which means that the client should not worry about what endpoint you are hitting, not the underlying server or the infrastructure or what they do. As we saw in the graph before, you don't care about that. If you are moving all their infrastructure somewhere else, that will be flawless to you. But you also have other constraints like statelessness, cacheability, and many others. I referenced at the end of the slides the dissertation. If you are curious, you can go read it. It's very interesting how these things are defined and designed from an academic perspective. After all of these, another term that comes up normally is RESTful API. That only means that a web service API follows the REST infrastructural constraints. So when you see in any documentation that a certain company provides REST APIs, provides REST APIs, they are actually providing RESTful APIs, as REST is the name of the standard, and RESTful are the actual set of endpoints you will use to interact with an application. So now, how do you define a RESTful API? What do you need to know and go look in the documentation before being able to use them? Well, for sure, you already know what the application is that you want to talk to. Starting from that, they have documentation about their APIs. Sometimes it's public, sometimes you will have to ask them as they have it available only for their clients. In my experience, it's that every time I have to use a new API, I have a lot of problems starting out. Sometimes it's the documentation that is very basic. Sometimes because I think something works in a certain way, but it doesn't. So it takes time. And you can find that even if you are using an enterprise application, you can find problems and missing feature that stops you. Don't get discouraged. You will find a way, and you may have to ask a lot of questions to the support team of the company you are working with, but I'm sure you can do it. So the first things to understand up front are authentication. First of all, we will talk about it a little bit more later, but there can be different ways on how you can authenticate in an API. So it's important to understand exactly how it works, because you may need help from other people to get some piece of the information to keep going on or to get started. So you may want to look it up before to speed up the process later on. Then the URI, which is basically what endpoints you need to use and what it is available in the APIs. Basically, it is the URL you need to call in order to get or send data that you need to work with an application. they mostly have a base URL that is always the same, and then they may be the related version of the API or the name of the group of endpoints you are going to use. This is not mandatory. It really depends how the API have been developed and how they have constructed their URL. The thing that you will see for sure is that at the end you will always have at the endpoint you are gonna hit, plus some a little bit some other information, like if you need to get the data of a user, at the end you may have to pass the user ID or the group ID to get the list of people in a certain group. Then we have method, which so when you run your request, the method you use basically tells the endpoint what action you want to do. Sometimes they are self-explanatory, like get. It is used to get or retrieve data. Post is used mostly to create new records, like new users or new issues, or to upload files somewhere. Put and patch, they look the same, but it depends on how the endpoint is developed and what meaning the developers gave to them. So normally, put is used to create a new additional content or something that to something that already exists, like adding a new comment or a new label to an existing issue. Patch normally is used to update the value of a content already there, like changing the title of an issue. But in my experience, most of the time patch is not used at all and only put is available, but this is not categorical. For example, in GitHub, when you want to update an issue that is already created, like updating the title or the label of a content, they use patch. Whereas if you want to add a new label or a new comment, they would use put because the value is not there yet. Slack instead doesn't use put and patch at all for any of the REST APIs we will see today. They manage everything using posts. Even when they want to edit a message or delete a message, they use always post. They also provide different APIs called Scheme, which is also a RESTful API. That allows you to manage users or groups for an enterprise use of the application. And in that case, they use put and patch together with post, for example. It's just to highlight that they may be developed differently, and not all the time you will find all of them. There are many more of them. If you have ever used Postman, I think they have 10, 15 of them. I'm not going to cover all of them. Also, for this exercise, it's going to take forever otherwise. Header allows you to pass additional information to the requests you do to the endpoints. You are basically providing additional metadata attached to the request, mostly useful information like what is the content type of the info you are sending to the endpoint in the request. You can send the authentication also within the header. From a response point of view, you get an header back with some other useful additional information, like exactly what content type the data you got back is, or the status of the response with some more granularity than just 200 sometimes when it goes well, or cache information about the cache and many other things. We will see some of them later in one of the examples. Then we have body. From a request point of view, is used when we want to send data through an endpoint, like with a put or a post method. For example, you can create a channel in Slack or a repo in GitLab, or update a user, or you can do it many other things. And with the body, you can send the actual data you want to add, to create, or to modify. And from a response point of view, the body is the actual data you get back from the endpoint. An advice, always start simple from that. If you are not familiar with it, if you have never done that, start simple from the documentation and try to get some result to get confidence with all this terminology and with the vendor terminology, or the application or the company you are working with terminology, because things may be called a little bit different and they don't always look the same. You can look online for examples. There are many people with the same problems. Most of the times when you look for API stuff, they are mostly in Python or curl, but at least you can get the initial format of the call. You have to place the data correctly, and then you can implement it in PowerShell if you want to use PowerShell. Sorry, I guess we all do, because we are here talking about PowerShell anyway. So what commandlets there are in PowerShell to allow us to use the APIs? Invoke-RestMethod is the one you would use. It allows you to send requests to a RESTful web service, and the output you can expect are different based on how the API have been developed. For example, you can have int64 string or XML document, or a PS object. And this is the beauty of Invoke-RestMethod. Given that JSON is the main standard companies use to give you results back when you are sending a request to an API, you are most likely to have the response in JSON, which in PowerShell is a string, but Invoke-RestMethod will automatically convert it in a PS custom object, ready to be used and inspected easily with some other piece of code. Based on what we learned so far from the theory behind the APIs and the rest, and all the pre-checks you can do reading the documentation up front, you can directly use the main parameters that Invoke-RestMethod provides. So method, you will pass the related method like put, post. If you don't add the parameter at all, it will default to get. URI will be the endpoint URI you want to use. It accepts strings, so you can build it programmatically, embedding variables in it, which can be very useful if you want to reuse some code, or you have more generic, or having a more generic implementation, and especially when you need to look out for IDs here and there, and you have to pass them through in the URI. You can just build the string before and then just call Invoke-RestMethod. This is the only actual required parameter. You can avoid naming it if you are only using it. And you can just say Invoke-RestMethod, HTTPS, blah, 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 blah. It will work because method is defaulted to get. So if you just need to get data without any authentication or content type or anything else, you can just use it like that. It's very rare that you can do something like that, especially when you need to access enterprise applications that needs for sure at least authentication. But sometimes if you want to look up some public API, this is something you can definitely do. Headers accept hash tables or a dictionary, which is then very easy to set up your data to and send them over. Body, specify the body of the request. As we said, if you need to, sorry? Okay, I thought someone said something. So if you need to create or edit something, you can pass those values into the body. And It can also be an hash table sometimes. Sometimes it needs to... Sorry, I lost the train of thought. So based on what we said before, you may think that you can then only use it with put, post, patch, but not get. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is a PowerShell thing. I'm not sure if it works in the same way with other languages though. If you need to send parameters in query string in the URL using a get method instead of concatenating these data to the URL, you can create an hash table and pass it in the dash body parameter, and that will automatically concatenate the URI as a key equals value string, which is a very, very useful for readability of the code. We will see a little bit of this later. And there is one thing that is not very clear to me about this and how the body works and is being implemented. I'm not sure if it is a PowerShell thing or some API and now they have been developed. I'm still trying to understand it. So if anyone knows, let me know later. But most of the times you can define the body as an hash table, as I said, to pass to Invoke-RestMethod with the values you need, like title equals blah, 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 some text you want to send out to add a title or to modify a title. And the endpoints, we get it as expected JSON, because maybe in the header you are predefining the content type to be application JSON, but sometimes it really doesn't work. Even if the content type is in the header and everything looks formatted correctly, you will have to convert that string to JSON first. So using convert to JSON, the commandlet in PowerShell, before to be able to send to pass it to the Invoke-REST method. Otherwise, you will just get an error. And we will see another example, an example of this also a little bit later. Then we have a bunch of very nice parameters that we got since PowerShell core, and now they are available in PowerShell 7. For example, response header variables. These new parameters allows you to look the header in the response to get more info. So when we said that the header gives you also get an header when you get your response, these parameters allows you to see actually this header and to look up the variables in it and their values, which can be very useful sometimes. Of course, there are many more parameters available. We will look it up for low relink and maximum for low relink, what they do later on with one of the examples. I'm not going to talk about all of all the others. Most of them I also never used, so I wouldn't be able to advise you. So for now, we will focus on those. Let's talk about authentication. So a little bit more in details. We have two types of authentication. So basic authentication, I'm just mentioning it as it's different method, but I'm not going to show any example of it. I added a reference at the end of the code, at the end of the slides with the code from PSConf.eu, where you can find example on about it and how to use it in PowerShell, which requires a little bit of manipulation. But basically, it is purely the use of a username and a password linked together as a pair with a colon between them. So username, colon, password, and then send it over through the header. Not all the applications support it, or most of them are decommissioning it because it's not considered very secure, but it may be easier to use it when this method is available than anything else that we will talk about, because you just put your password, your username and your password, and it's easy to test or to just run a call to an API. Then we have bearer tokens. They are defined by an RFC as an opaque string, not intended to have any meaning to the client using it. It's just a string of characters, numbers, letters, uppercase, lowercase. It really depends on how they have been developed. They can have different lengths, different forms. The application you are using can issue the token to you in different ways. Sometimes from an interface, you can just go and generate one and you are ready to go. Sometimes you have to define the scopes or the permission, link it to it, or create your own custom application inside the application to be able to generate a token. And then you can use it. Sometimes you have to issue it through calling different endpoints through the API, as the application requires to validate that it's really you asking for it. So you may have to send a request to an endpoint sending an application ID or some secret code that the application provided you upfront in order to get the actual token. So it's like an old kind of authentication. So you need to do more steps that are more secure in order to get your actual token. TLS is mandatory most of the times, which means it's more secure to transmit this information. Of course, you still have to save these tokens in a password manager, in a vault, or somewhere, not write them in as a plain text in your script, even though I guess some of us still do this sometimes, but we can do better. Another plus is that if they are generated programmatically with an API call, they are sent as a response in a JSON format. So it's easy then to just pass it over to another endpoint that you need to authenticate to. Also, depending on how the API is developed, the token can be sent in the request, within the header, within the body, or in query string in the URI. It really depends how they have been developed. Now, let's show to you a couple of examples, finally, after all this talk. So this is an example of how you would authenticate into Slack. Now, Slack doesn't allow basic authentication at all. And the way you can generate your token is that you have to go and create your own custom application inside Slack. What I did, it was creating my own test workspace. It's free, everyone can do it. I am going to explain to you how to create these custom apps and how it works in Slack. I linked in the slides at the end reference on how to get started with that. The thing you probably need to know is that there are many ways that you can generate those applications and the different ways, different types of tokens that you can get out of them, depending on what type of Slack you're using. If you're using enterprise grid or a Payball type of Slack because you are managing it for your company, you can generate super admin kind of tokens where you can manage users, create new ones, they provision them when they leave the company. So they are very powerful. You have visibility on on everything. But in normal Slack, every user, in every other type of Slack, a normal user can generate their own application because maybe they just want to automate some process, like I don't know, sending to your team channel an event when something you manage is down, or someone has created a ticket in Jira and you want to be notified in Slack instead of receiving the email. No one likes emails. So if you read a little bit about that in the documentation, you will be able to create your own applications there. And within that, you will have to define what scope and permission you want the token to have. Of course, always choose to have the least amount of scopes, because so your token is not overpowerful, basically. That's it. The one I generated is basically pretty, doesn't really have a lot of permission. It's just can list all the channels, write in them, look at the private channels if he wants to. And that's it. The other thing, so the way I am storing the token is using the secret management module in PowerShell. I'm not going to go through that and if it is the best or not way to manage tokens. This is a whole other talk, talking about which one, what are the different methods of storing tokens. The only thing that is important is really don't write them into your script if you can. And what I did here, it was just to install the module and then set my token to something, to the one that I got out from Slack. And then you can just retrieve it using get secret. The thing you have to know is that if you use this and if you simply do get secret and calling the name to retrieve it, you get a secure string, a PowerShell secure string, like the variable you will have when you do get credentials. And if you pass that to the API, it doesn't work because you need to detokenize. So you have to give it as a plain text so it can recognize that it is the actual token that you defined from the interface of the application. This example just lists all the channels that I have created in this Slack instance. So as you can see, the URI, this kind of endpoint, the URI is the base URI, which is the first part of it. It's always slack.com/API, and then at the end you have the name of the endpoint you actually are gonna eating. It is called conversation. I think Slack before had channels, but they decommissioned all that set of endpoints and they renamed it to be conversations, basically. So now I'm not sure about this naming convention, but this is what they support now in order to manage channels. And what I did, what Slack support is sending the authorization token through the header. And what you will do is just to create an hash table with the key, the authorization, and then you pass the token as a string where the prefix is bearer. Now, bearer is the word you would most of the time use is the standard, is the most used standard in many of those applications that provides APIs, but it's not always like that. So you will find most of the times better, it's always the same. Sometimes you won't, and we will see later with GitHub. And then we are basically done, because what you will do after you have set it up all the variables for calling those APIs, you just set up your Invoke-RestMethod, pass in the method, the URI and the header, and you just get your channels. So I already loaded the token, so I don't need to run that. But if I do this and then showing to you that the result that we got is an object. So if I do results.getType, if I can type, it's a PS custom object. So even though we it returns a JSON, you already have an object that you can navigate in and see how see and look at the data, basically. What you can see from the result is that you got this variable that is okay and the value is true. Now, what happens if we run the same but with a random string like this? Let's see. What you get is an error. So okay, in this case is false and the error is invalid or out. And this helps you. So before it wasn't like that, so you can understand that you got some data back. It means that the authentication worked correctly and your token was fine. Whereas if it doesn't work, you may get an error like this, and you will be, or not all the time is the same. You can get 401 or whatever other error you can get when you cannot authenticate. It depends how it is developed and what they send you back in order to understand what the problem is. If we go look at GitHub, so GitHub doesn't allow basic authentication anymore. They decommissioned it in last year, actually, a few months ago. Yeah, 1 year or something. GitHub also allows you to create these tokens in different ways. One way, which is one I use because it was the easiest, is from the interface. You can just generate a token, which is a dev token or a test one. They, it's written in bold like this. Don't use it in production. So I just did it because it was way easier to do that. Otherwise, as Slack, you can create your own custom application where you will set up the scope and all the permission you want the token to have, and then it will generate the token for you. It allows auth authentication as well, and I link it down to the slide also how to use the apps in GitHub in case you may want to do anything in production with it, but otherwise you can just generate a dev token from the interface, and you can start playing around with their API. So same thing, I said my password in the PowerShell vault. It works exactly the same way as we saw for Slack. The only thing is that for this kind of token, instead of having bearer as a prefix to the token, they accept it they have token, basically. And this is the only difference. Also, there is something to say that if a repository is public in GitLab, you don't need to authenticate. We will see an example later about that. And this one, for example, is a repo I created in my own account that is private to me only. So if I want to reach it, I need to authenticate in order to be able to see it. So let's see what results do we get back with this. Okay. So if we go up, the result is a lot of information. So everything about your repository. That is, it has an ID, probably from the database, the name of the repository, the actual full name with my account. Is it private? Yes, it's true. That's why we needed the token to log into it. A bunch of other links that allows you to go to the tags or to the events if there are any, to the issues. A lot of nice information. What happens if the token is not correct like before. So let's run the header again, and we only want, oops, sorry. We only want to run this without the header. So actually, no, let's run it with the header as well because I changed it. If we run this with the wrong token, you kind of get this, which is a little dirty, but it tells you the error is bad credential, and this is just a refuse of what it was result before, because this didn't return anything and the results didn't get assigned with anything anymore. So you basically have these bad credentials error that tells you that your token was wrong, and you just need to run it again. And what you got here is the old variable, basically. Actually, if we do like this only, maybe it's better. Oh no, sorry. This is another thing. Okay, let's go ahead. I wanted to improvise, but I shouldn't have done that. Okay, so basically those are, this is how you will use a token. Now, in the case, I'm not going to show it to you, but in the case you would have to generate the token programmatically with a no-node exchange with the application servers or everything. Before being able to use it, you probably will have to call a bunch of other APIs, sometimes a couple, sometimes just one, before you will be able to get your token. So it's not just about that. It depends what they develop, how they develop the API. In the documentation, it will be written exactly what you will have to do and what is the format of the data you will get back. Now, let's go back to the slide for a second, and let's talk about pagination. So you may be already familiar with what pagination is in general. I don't have an academic definition for it. What I normally say, it is the concept of dividing the results into different pages. Why do we need this? Can we just, download everything, or that we need? It doesn't really work that well if you want to, have all the data in using one call. Pagination helps immensely performance when you are trying to retrieve data from somewhere, and APIs also can potentially return millions of results sometimes, and from a server, and it can eat that server very hard if the pagination is not implemented in the correct way. It's like you want to go to stackoverflow.com looking for all PowerShell questions, but you just go to the home page and they load all the questions that have ever been created. That would be a massive amount of data to publish in one single page. It would scale very well. The page will just load forever or time out at some point. And the same concept applies to the endpoint that provides a list of entities. Most likely they will use, some sort of pagination, otherwise it's going to be impossible for you to get the data out of it. Also, companies, when they develop APIs, have limits, rate limits on how many calls you can run per second or in a range of time based on your IP. All of these to assure good performance, and also for security reasons. If you're being hit by some hacker, they can just stop all the calls and trying to fix what was wrong. There are other types. So there are other types that the ones we will talk about today, but I couldn't explain them all. We didn't have enough time. So what type of paginations we will see tonight is I listed these two. You can also have known. So, but it's very rare. It mostly is when you have a very small company or very new and you don't have many clients still, they want to provide some sort of APIs and then think about the scalability of the performance of their own APIs. I think Slack, they have introduced for their scheme APIs, the ones that manage users, pagination, I think 2 or 3 years ago, like they forced people to use them. Otherwise, they were there was no limit to that. So even big companies, sometimes they take time to implement these things correctly. So the first one here in the list is Relay Cursor, and I read somewhere in Facebook documentation that they say that is the most efficient method for paginating, and it should always be used when possible. Now, I'm not sure about that, but it's pretty cool, and you don't need to calculate the amount of pages you need to read. You just can keep following this cursor until there is one that brings you to the next page, to the last page. So you can read all of them sequentially. A cursor is just a random string of characters, and depending on how it is developed, it can have different shapes and formats. And it is tied to a specific item in the list of data. And depending on how the API has been developed, it can be an all object having different parameters, like the link to the previous page, the link to the next page, or it can just have a single value, which is only the next page, which is the mostly used and important if you think about it. This info is held into the body of the response. That's why it is tied to the item itself. You do a request to an API and you get a response back. In that response, you will have the data you requested plus this cursor that is the link specific from this page to the next page. If you use that somewhere else from the 5th page to try to access the 6th page, it doesn't work. It will bring you back to the 2nd page, basically. So you have to then, when you get it, you have to retrieve this data from the body in a certain way and then send it back again if you want to access each other page you have next to that. Let's see how it works before talking about the other one. And this is the example with Slack. Slack uses this kind of pagination. So when you are using pagination, you for sure have to go and look out the documentation and for each how it has been developed, because they can use different naming convention, they can have different types, they can call things differently. So it's very, very important that you prepare yourself before you try to use anything, otherwise it won't work. What we need to know about Slack, for example, is that in query string Slack, you have to get acclimatized, how do you say it, with a couple of different variables. One of them, the first one, is limit, which is the amount of result you want to see in each page. Now, sometimes it is called count, sometimes it's called limit, or it can have different names. That's why you will have to go and look for in the documentation to understand what to use. Now, I created in my Slack environment something like 30-ish channels like that, so we can play a little bit with the pagination. I don't remember the limit. Maybe it was 25. So all the companies give you a total amount of items that you can retrieve in each page. Then you can decide to get less than that, but you can never go over that. Of course, if you have 1,000 of users to retrieve and you want to get the maximum in every page, so you have to send, I don't know, if you have 5,000 users and you can get 1,000 every time, you would like to get 1,000, so you have to send only 5 calls instead of sending 1,000, getting 100 or something to get 100 pages or 100 users at a time or something like that. So in this case, given that I have around 30-something channels, I set my limit to 5. So I want to get 5 channels in every page. How do we do that? So this is exactly the same example and the same endpoint we were getting before, conversation list. But now, based on the documentation, Slack wants to have limit with some number in it, in query string to the URI. Now, I said before that for readability, you can actually do something like this, limit equals 5, just append to the URI every parameter they are expecting there in query string. But for readability, I tend always to create a body as a hash table. So even if you have to pass 3, 4, 5 parameters, it's way more readable this than having, you know, a huge string in your URI and then you have to scroll on the side. But of course, you can use anything you like. This is just an example. Once you define the limit that you want, basically we are ready to go because we have the method, we have the header, and the total amount of items we want for every page. So if we run these, okay, talk about this. So if you run this, what you get in channel object is the object. It's the same thing we got before, right? It tells you, yeah, okay, the call went well, you could authenticate, we got some of the data. Let's see, if we do channel, given that it's an object, we can already navigate it very easily, and we can see that we got 5 channels, which is the one I asked for. But the nice thing of this is I didn't show you before. If we do format list, to see this in a little better way, what happened is that we don't only have, okay, a channel, but at the end we have this parameter called restore response metadata, which adds the cursor that I've been talking about. So what happens is that this is the first page, and this is the cursor that allows you to go to the second page. And the way you use it is that when you get it, what you normally do is you just navigate this as an object, as we have done, like these set of channels. You call response metadata and then the next cursor, and then you get the string exactly in this way. So it's pretty easy. Another thing, why did I call it before and why I'm creating this variable assigning the channels? So this is just like 5 channels. It's not a big deal. But when you are retrieving thousands of records, you really want to call those APIs as less as you can. Also, sometimes it's time consuming, so you don't want it to run for minutes. Given that I already got the first page, I'm assigning already to a variable those 5 channels, and the same variable then I'm gonna use later on for each page to collect all the data out of Slack, basically. And so what I do, I create a loop, which it's always a while in this case, because all the pages will have this value apart from the last one. So every page will, this will run up until the last page, and then when it looks up for this is null, so it will exit the while without overflowing and going to a page that doesn't exist. What I do inside here is that Slack also accept the cursor, so this value. You need to pass it in query string in the URL, and cursor is the name of the variable Slack is expecting this string to appear. So again, I want to make it readable instead of adding this whole thing to the URI, which will make it almost unreadable. I'm creating a body that will be automatically added in query string to the URI later on because it's a get. And what I do is just running this loop, and every time it will run, it will call the API for the next page. It will retrieve the channels and assign this set of channels again to this channels list variable, and we will have all our data. Now, did I run this first? I don't think so. So let's run all of these. F8. Okay, so channel list else the amount of, oh no, if I run it correctly, it should be, yeah, 31. If we look at the channel object, which is I'm basically replacing for every page, this is the last page. And I want to show to you this because as you can see, the response metadata is empty. That's why the while stopped. And basically that's it. This is all you have to do. Then channel list will have the data you retrieved, and you can do anything with it, whatever you want. I don't know. This time we just want to list the name of the channels I have. This is, you see, I created them with the loop. They are all the same. And that's it, basically. If we go back 1 second to the pagination, so let's talk a little bit about relation link in the response header. What is this? It is very nice. This is my favorite pagination method. That's why I always talk about it. So relation link are, as a concept is very similar to relay cursor. They are used to indicate the relationship between a sequence of pages, like the previous, the next, the first, or the last page. But this time, this information is held into the header of the response, not in the body. And the format of those links are not a random string, but it is a real URI that you can use and just go to the next page, like if it was the first URI you sent. And the relations links have their own dedicated parameters in Invoke-RestMethod, which are the ones I was showing to you a few slides later. And since PowerShell core, those have been, I have been using them a lot because it's very, very useful and very easy to use. Basically, they allow you to follow the link without having to develop your own loop to read all the pages, because the body you get is actually the actual data you are looking for, and with those switches in IT and Invoke-RestMethod, it will loop it itself, so you don't need to create your own loop as we did before. And let me show to you, because GitHub is one of those that use them. Now, the example, I didn't use my own repository because I don't have all those issues. And this is more a live example. You can also test yourself at home. The PowerShell repository, given that it's public, as I said before, doesn't need authentication. That's why there is nothing, there is no authentication in this piece of code. The method is get, because we are, this example basically allows you to get all the issues from the PowerShell repository. And this is the URI you would use out of it, which is so API github.com, and repos, this is generic. It means you are reaching out the repos group of endpoints, and then you pass the user and the actual repository name, and issues is the actual endpoint that will run the function on the server side to retrieve your issues. How do you do this? So what you need to know is just the method and the URI. Then you can use follow a link, which is a switch that goes into the header. So call the APIs the first time, then gets the response. It goes into the header, reads the relation link, the next relation link. I'm going to show it to you in a second. And then keeps calling all those next pages until it visited all of them. There is another switch that is also very useful called maximum follower link. So I am not gonna look at all of them because we cannot wait a few minutes just for this to finish to run. So it allows you to stop the loop at the number of pages that you decide, in this case 4 pages. So it will run 4 times. It will give me the maximum amount of items that I can get in a page 4 times. So let's try to do this. It should finish, yeah. So what we got, issue list is the variable with the data I got back. Now, this is an array where each item in the array is the list of the items in a page. So each item of the array is one of the pages. And if we count this, we get 4 because we got 4 pages back. If you want to visit one of the values to see what it is, how many they are, then it's 30, because by default, GitHub returns you 30 items at the time. This is their limit. When we were talking about limit, this is the amount they provide. Then if you want to look to the third ticket that we got, this is how a ticket, an issue, sorry, not ticket, looks like in GitHub when you get it. You get some information like the actual URL of the issue, which one is the repository, labels, comments URL. You can use those to navigate them into the comments and to retrieve them programmatically, which are very useful sometimes. This is the ID, probably from the database, the issue number, the title, information about the user. I think this is the creator of the ticket, the list of labels, a lot of information, the body with all the description, basically, which is very nice. When you need to retrieve, all this kind of information. But where is this link that follower link is using? The way you can see it is through using these response header variables, which is another switch that has been made available since PowerShell core. And the way you use it, you just assign it to a string that will be created as a variable later on once you run Invoke-RestMethod. So let's say we want to retrieve, and another thing, for each time this runs, this variable will hold the last, the header of the last page that we have been retrieving, and I will show to you how and why I'm saying this. So we run it again, we get the first 4 pages of issues from the PowerShell repository. Now, response header is a variable. And this is basically the header that we get back. You have it already as object format. You can get some information. Now, all the companies that don't really implement pagination this way, if you look at the header, doesn't really give you a lot of information. The others that do, you can get some nice information about it if you need. Most of them, to me, doesn't really mean anything, and I really never needed that. That's why. But for example, it tells you when did you run the call, to what server you were eating, I don't know, content type of the body that you got in your response. But if you look closely, there is this link value here, which is the one that holds the actual relation link that follower link use. So if we do this, it's still a little bit ugly, but you can understand, you will be able to read a little bit. So it's a list of links that of URIs, basically, that brings you to this one is the first, is the previous page. This is why I said that the header is the one from the last page that we got, because the previous page is page 3. Then you can go to the next page, which is page 5, which exists because we stopped at 4, but there are many more other pages. Like the last one is page 100, and the relationship is last. And this one is the first page. So you can use those links even if you are in another page and you want to go back to the first for some reason, because programmatically you are developing something. I don't know what would be the reason. This is the place and how you will retrieve those URI. And it is very, very easy to use, basically, because you don't need to do anything. I mean, once you retrieve data, yes, this is an array, you will have to loop into it to get your data, but you will have to loop into it anyway, because it's going to be an object, or you will create your own PS custom object or something when you retrieve data from an API. So it's one less loop that you have to worry about. And this is the beauty of it. Now, I think I'm almost finished the time. I had some other examples with post, but I don't think we have a lot of more time. So I'm just gonna go to the last slide. And so what we learned today, always read the documentation first to avoid headaches later. I had a lot of problems. All these things I've been telling you, how the body has to be set up, where things, some of the parameters, some of the documentation, sometimes they don't tell you where things have to be. Sometimes you put them all in a body, but then they are expecting in a query string or the vice versa. The authentication is not, they give you example only the response, but sometimes never of how actually you have to structure your call, which is sometimes is different. It really depends on the company you are working with, the application you are trying to read things of. It can be very difficult without, you know, good documentation. But anyway, even if when it's bad, at least it's something. And the more you use them, the more you will also learn how to read their documentation, or what to ask to if you need to contact their technical support. PowerShell makes using the APIs very easy. Yes, you just need to learn a little bit how to set it up, those variables and what you need, but most of the time it's just using hash tables to define your variables, and then Invoke-RestMethod is very, very easy then to use. Most of the work is retrieving the data and how you have to present them to the API. But then with PowerShell, even as we saw in the relation link, it makes it very easy to use. It does things for you, so you don't have to worry about the development behind that. And the last thing, I always say that always save your secrets somewhere. Some people think that tokens are not the password, so they can put them in clearing scripts. I have done that at the beginning as well. I always talk about you know, how safe and secure your tokens have to be. It is very important when you, especially when you run them, when you need to pass them in query string, for example, and then you are maybe printing the URL you are sending in a log file because you wanna, you know, trace your things, and then your tokens, they end up into your log files without you even noticing. So be very careful, save your secrets somewhere, and don't publish them anywhere. And yeah, some references. Maybe I'm gonna add something more later on. And yeah,